The steady beeping of hospital monitors filled the room as I lay there, exhausted but elated, cradling my newborn son. The morning light filtered through the window, casting a gentle glow on his tiny face. Everything seemed perfect until Brandon walked in, his expression cold and distant, so different from the loving husband I thought I knew. "I can't do this anymore, Skylar," he said, standing at the foot of my hospital bed. "I'm not ready for this responsibility." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, clutching our son closer to my chest, thinking this must be some kind of cruel joke. But Brandon's face remained stern, emotionless, as if he were discussing a business transaction rather than abandoning his wife and newborn child. "What do you mean?" My voice trembled. "We planned this together. We've been trying for a baby for 2 years." He ran his fingers through his dark hair, a gesture I once found endearing, but now seemed like a stranger's nervous tick. "I've been seeing someone else," he confessed, his words cutting through the air like shards of glass. "She's different. She understands my needs, my ambitions. I can't be tied down with a family right now." The monitors began beeping faster as my heart rate increased. A nurse poked her head in, concerned, but I waved her away. I couldn't process what was happening. Just yesterday, Brandon had been by my side during labor, holding my hand, telling me how excited he was to start our family. Now, less than 24 hours later, he was standing here, destroying everything we'd built together. "How long?" I managed to ask, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. 6 months, he replied, not even having the decency to look ashamed. "Jennifer works at the firm. She's been helping me with the Maxwell account." Jennifer, the new junior partner, the one he'd mentioned casually in conversation, telling me how brilliant she was, how she was revolutionizing their approach to client relations. All those late nights at the office suddenly made sense. All those business dinners, all those weekend conferences. My son stirred in my arms, his tiny fingers wrapping around my index finger. The gesture brought tears to my eyes, not just of sadness, but of fierce determination. This perfect, innocent being depended on me now, even if his father had chosen to walk away. "You're making a mistake, Brandon," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "This isn't just about you anymore. This is about our son." He shook his head, already backing toward the door. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce and child support arrangements." "I'm sorry, Skylar. I really am." As he turned to leave, I called out, "His name is Dylan." Brandon paused for a moment but didn't turn back. "The son you're abandoning. His name is Dylan Michael Harrison. Remember that." The door closed behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo through the suddenly too quiet room. I looked down at Dylan, sleeping peacefully, unaware that his life had just changed forever. My tears fell on his hospital blanket as I made him a silent promise. "We're going to be okay, little one," I whispered, gently stroking his cheek. "Mommy's going to make sure of that." I had no idea then how that promise would shape the next chapter of our lives, or that Brandon's betrayal would set in motion a series of events that would transform me in ways I never imagined. As I sat there in that hospital room, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life, I couldn't have known that this ending was actually going to be my beginning. The nurse returned, this time with my discharge papers and a sympathetic smile. She had obviously overheard enough to understand what had happened. "Do you want me to call someone for you?" she asked kindly. I thought about my options. My parents had passed away years ago in a car accident. Brandon had been my rock then, helping me through the grief. The irony wasn't lost on me. My sister lived across the country in California, busy with her own life and family. I had friends, but most of them were couples we knew through Brandon's firm. Whose side would they take in all this? "No," I replied, straightening my shoulders. "But could you help me pack up my things? Dylan and I need to figure out what comes next." The drive home from the hospital was surreal. My neighbor, Ellen, had offered to help after hearing what happened through the hospital grapevine. Her sister worked as a maternity nurse. As she navigated through the familiar streets, I sat in the back seat next to Dylan's car seat, unable to take my eyes off him. My mind raced with questions I never thought I'd have to answer. How would I afford our mortgage on my teacher's salary? Would I be able to return to work after my maternity leave? What would I tell everyone? "I made up the guest room for you," Ellen said, breaking the silence as we pulled into my driveway. I hope you don't mind, but I didn't think you'd want to sleep in. Well, you know. I nodded, grateful for her thoughtfulness. The idea of sleeping in the bed Brandon and I had shared for 5 years made my stomach turn. As we approached the front door, I noticed small changes that indicated Brandon had already been here. His running shoes missing from the porch, the silly welcome mat we'd picked out together replaced with a plain one. Inside, the house felt different too. Emptier, despite only a few missing items. Brandon's laptop was gone from his desk, along with some clothes and personal items. He'd left everything else, including the framed ultrasound picture on the refrigerator. The sight of it made my chest tighten. I'll put on some tea, Ellen offered, heading to the kitchen while I settled Dylan in his bassinet, the one Brandon's parents had given us at the baby shower just 2 weeks ago. The memory of that day, of everyone's happy faces and congratulations, felt like a cruel joke now. As I sank into the couch, my phone buzzed with a text from Brandon's mother, Barbara. "Skylar, darling, please tell me this is all a misunderstanding. Brandon's not making any sense. Call me when you can." I stared at the message until the screen went dark. Barbara had always been kind to me, treating me like the daughter she never had. How could I tell her that her son had thrown away our family for a younger woman? That he'd planned his escape while pretending to be excited about becoming a father? Ellen returned with 2 steaming mugs, setting them on the coffee table. "You don't have to answer anyone right now," she said gently. "Give yourself time to process." "I don't even know where to start," I admitted, my voice cracking. Everything we planned, everything we saved for, it was all based on 2 incomes. The nursery renovations maxed out our credit card because Brandon promised— I couldn't finish the sentence. Brandon had promised so many things. He'd insisted on the expensive crib, the top-of-the-line stroller, saying our child deserved the best. Had he already known then that he was going to leave? Had he been setting me up for financial disaster? "One step at a time," Ellen said firmly. "First, you need rest and time to recover. The practical stuff can wait a few days." But it couldn't wait. Not really. As if to emphasize this point, my phone buzzed again, this time with an email from Brandon's lawyer. My hands shook as I opened it. "Dear Mrs. Harrison, I have been retained by Brandon Harrison regarding your impending divorce. Please have your legal representative contact my office to discuss the terms." Legal representative. Terms. The words swam before my eyes. I had no lawyer. I had no savings separate from our joint account, which I suddenly realized Brandon might have already emptied. The mounting pressure in my chest made it hard to breathe. Dylan's soft cry from the bassinet cut through my panic like a lifeline. I got up, my body still sore from giving birth, and lifted him into my arms. His tiny weight anchored me to reality, his newborn scent clearing my head slightly. I said slowly, rocking Dylan gently, "I need to make some calls tomorrow. My sister Kate might know a good lawyer in the area, and I should probably talk to Principal Matthews about extending my maternity leave." Ellen nodded approvingly. "That's good thinking. And Skylar? I know Tom and I aren't exactly flush with cash, but we can help with a loan if you need it, just until things get sorted out." Her kindness brought fresh tears to my eyes, but these were different from the ones I'd shed in the hospital. Those had been tears of shock and betrayal. These were tears of gratitude, of realizing I wasn't completely alone. As the afternoon wore on, I began making lists, something I'd always done when feeling overwhelmed. Legal questions to ask, financial documents to gather, people to contact. With each item I wrote down, I felt a tiny bit more in control. Then I found it, tucked away in my home office desk drawer. A business card from a career coaching service I'd considered contacting last year when I'd thought about pursuing my master's degree. Brandon had discouraged the idea, saying the timing wasn't right with us trying for a baby. Now I wondered if that had been another way of keeping me dependent on him. I pinned the card to my bulletin board, a small act of defiance against the future Brandon had chosen for me. Dylan cooed from his bassinet, and I walked over to pick him up again. "You know what, little one?" I whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Maybe it's time for both of us to learn who we can be without your father holding us back." As evening settled in and Ellen reluctantly prepared to leave, promising to check on us tomorrow, I felt the first stirrings of something unexpected. Not confidence exactly, but possibility. The path ahead was terrifying and unclear, but for the first time since Brandon walked into that hospital room, I felt something besides despair. I had no way of knowing then that this feeling, this tiny spark of determination, would grow into a flame that would light my way through the darkness ahead. But that night, as I fed Dylan in the quiet of the guest room, I made another promise to my son. We're not just going to survive this, baby. We're going to thrive. 2 weeks after Brandon's departure, I sat at our home office desk, surrounded by papers and running on 2 hours of sleep. Dylan had finally dozed off in his swing beside me, giving me a chance to sort through the mountain of financial documents I'd gathered. What I found made my blood run cold. The first red flag was our joint savings account, nearly empty except for my last paycheck deposit. The second was a series of large transfers to an account I didn't recognize, dating back almost 8 months. But it was the third discovery that made me realize just how calculated Brandon's betrayal had been. "Oh my God," I whispered, staring at the mortgage statement in my trembling hands. The refinancing papers I'd signed 3 months ago, the ones Brandon had rushed me through during a particularly exhausting week of morning sickness, hadn't been for a better interest rate as he'd claimed. He'd taken out a massive home equity loan, leaving me with a mortgage payment nearly double what it had been. The room started spinning. I gripped the desk edge, forcing myself to take deep breaths. The baby books had warned about postpartum anxiety, but this wasn't hormone-induced panic. This was the reality of how thoroughly my husband had planned my financial ruin. My phone buzzed. A text from Kate, my sister. "Just landed. Heading to the lawyer's office now. You okay?" Kate had dropped everything and flown in from California the moment I'd told her about the suspicious financial activity I'd found. As a forensic accountant, she'd insisted on coming to help me make sense of our finances before my appointment with the divorce lawyer. "Found something big," I texted back. "Really bad." 3 dots appeared immediately. "Don't tell me anything else over text. Document everything. I'll be there in 2 hours." Just then, the doorbell rang. Dylan stirred in his swing, and I held my breath, praying he wouldn't wake. Through the security camera feed on my phone, installed by Ellen's husband Tom after we'd found Brandon's Range Rover parked outside late one night, I saw Barbara, my mother-in-law, standing on the porch. I hadn't spoken to her since that first text message, letting her calls go to voicemail as I tried to process everything. But now, seeing her familiar figure clutching what looked like a photo album, I felt a sudden urge to face her. Maybe it was the morning's discoveries making me bold, or maybe I just needed someone else to witness the extent of Brandon's deception. "I know you're home, Skylar," Barbara called out softly. "Please, I just want to talk." Dylan was still sleeping soundly. The baby monitor was charged. I could spare a few minutes. When I opened the door, Barbara's usual perfectly composed appearance was noticeably frayed. Her silver hair was unstyled, and her eyes were red-rimmed behind her designer glasses. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, reaching for me. Despite everything, I let her pull me into a hug. She smelled like she always had, Chanel No. 5 and coffee. And for a moment, I was transported back to happier times, Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations when I'd truly felt like part of her family. "Come in," I said, leading her to the living room. "But Dylan is finally sleeping, so we need to keep our voices down." Barbara nodded, settling onto the couch and placing the photo album on the coffee table. "I've been trying to understand," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "Brandon won't tell me anything beyond that he's found someone else and that he needs to live his truth, whatever that means. But then yesterday, I was going through some old family photos, and I found these." She opened the album, and I saw myself and Brandon on our wedding day 5 years ago. We looked so young, so happy. I was about to ask why she was showing me this when she flipped to the next page, and my heart stopped. There was another wedding photo, yellowed with age, but the similarity was uncanny. A young man who could have been Brandon's twin stood beside a beautiful bride, both beaming at the camera. "That's Richard, Brandon's father, and his first wife, Linda," Barbara said quietly. "The marriage no one in the family talks about. He left her the same way, when she was in the hospital after giving birth to their son. Then he met me 6 months later. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Brandon has a half-brother? Barbara nodded, wiping away a tear. Daniel. He's tried to contact Brandon several times over the years, but Brandon always refused to meet him. I thought Brandon was just protecting himself from a painful family history. I never imagined he would. Repeat it, I finished, feeling sick. Did Richard leave Linda the same way? Financially, I mean? Yes, Barbara whispered. He cleaned out their accounts, refinanced their home without her knowledge. Linda lost everything. She and Daniel ended up moving in with her parents in Seattle. I never tried to contact them after Richard and I got married. It was easier to pretend that part of his life never happened. The baby monitor crackled with Dylan's first stirrings of wakefulness. I stood up, needing to move, to think. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Barbara reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. Because I failed Linda by staying silent. I won't fail you too. This is a check for $50,000, my personal savings. It's not a loan. It's what I should have done 30 years ago when I discovered what Richard had done. I stared at the envelope, not reaching for it. Brandon will be furious if he finds out. Let him be, Barbara said with sudden steel in her voice. I've spent 30 years trying to make up for marrying a man who could abandon his child. I won't spend another 30 watching my grandson grow up in hardship because I was too afraid to stand up to my son. The baby monitor erupted with Dylan's hungry cry. As I turned to go get him, Barbara called out softly, Skylar, there's something else you should know. Linda. She went on to start one of the most successful crisis shelters for women in Washington state. She took her pain and turned it into purpose. I paused in the doorway, letting her words sink in. Up in the nursery, Dylan was fully awake now, his cries growing more insistent. But for the first time in weeks, my mind wasn't clouded by fear and uncertainty. Instead, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced since before Brandon walked into that hospital room. I had my son to think about, yes. But I also had a choice to make about who I was going to be in the aftermath of this betrayal. And maybe, just maybe, this legacy of abandonment would end with me. The law office of Patricia Chen didn't look anything like I'd imagined. Instead of imposing mahogany and leather, the space was bright and modern, with walls painted in calming shades of blue. Kate sat beside me, her laptop open, while Dylan slept peacefully in his carrier. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Patricia said, reviewing the documents spread across her desk. Your husband not only emptied your joint accounts, but also took out a home equity loan without your full knowledge of the terms? Yes, Kate answered before I could, her voice tight with controlled anger. And I've found evidence of him moving money into hidden accounts for months before the baby was born. Classic preparation for abandonment. Patricia nodded, making notes. The good news is, this kind of financial deception during marriage is taken very seriously by the courts. The bad news is, we need to move quickly to prevent any further damage. She looked at me directly. Are you ready for what comes next? Because once we file these papers, Brandon will likely become very unpleasant. I thought about Barbara's revelation, about Linda and her transformation from victim to advocate. I'm ready, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. What do I need to do? The next few hours were a blur of signatures and strategy discussions. Patricia helped me file for an emergency hearing to freeze our remaining assets and get temporary support for Dylan. Kate worked on tracking down the hidden accounts, her expression growing grimmer with each discovery. There's one more thing, I said as we were wrapping up. I want to look into going back to school. Not right away, but soon. I had been considering a master's in educational leadership before. Everything. Patricia smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her. Actually, that's excellent timing. Given Brandon's actions and income level, we can petition for him to cover educational expenses as part of the support agreement. He derailed your career advancement during the marriage. We can make that part of our case. As we left the office, Kate pulled me into a fierce hug. I'm so proud of you, little sister. But why didn't you tell me about wanting to go back to school before? I shrugged, adjusting Dylan's carrier. It never seemed like the right time. Brandon always had reasons why we should wait. You mean he always had reasons why you should stay dependent on him, Kate corrected. Just like he had reasons why you should quit your investment club, and reasons why you shouldn't start that summer tutoring program you talked about. Her words hit home. How many of my dreams had I put aside because Brandon had convinced me the timing wasn't right? How many opportunities had I missed because I was too busy trying to be the perfect wife he claimed he wanted? That evening, after Kate left for her hotel and Dylan was down for his first sleep of the night, I found myself drawn to my home office. The career coaching business card was still pinned to my bulletin board, but now I noticed something else. A photo tucked into the corner of an old corkboard, nearly hidden behind years of accumulated papers. It was from my first year of teaching, taken at the district awards ceremony where I'd been named Outstanding New Educator. I was beaming at the camera, clutching my certificate, surrounded by my students and colleagues. I remembered that feeling, pride, accomplishment, the sense that I could make a real difference in my students' lives. What had happened to that passionate, ambitious young teacher? My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. My lawyer tells me you're being unreasonable about the house. This would all be easier if you'd just accept the reality of the situation. I stared at his message, feeling something shift inside me. The reality of the situation? The reality was that he had systematically worked to diminish me, to keep me dependent and controllable. The reality was that he had planned his escape while watching me decorate our baby's nursery. The reality was that he was just like his father, a coward who ran away from responsibility. But there was another reality he hadn't counted on. I wasn't Linda, alone and isolated in a different time. I had Kate's expertise, Barbara's support, and Patricia's legal experience in my corner. I had Ellen next door, watching out for us. Most importantly, I had years of suppressed dreams and ambitions finally breaking free. I picked up my phone and opened the browser, searching for Linda Harrison plus Seattle plus crisis shelter. The results led me to a website for New Beginnings Women's Center, and there she was. Brandon's father's first wife, now a distinguished-looking woman in her 60s, described as the founder and executive director. Without letting myself overthink it, I clicked on the Contact Us link and began typing. Dear Ms. Harrison, you don't know me, but my name is Skylar Harrison. Until 2 weeks ago, I was married to your son Brandon's half-brother. I recently learned about our shared experience, and I find myself hoping to learn from your journey. Dylan's cry through the baby monitor interrupted my typing. As I headed upstairs to feed him, I saved the draft email. I wasn't quite ready to send it. Not yet. But for the first time since Brandon's betrayal, I felt like I was moving toward something rather than just running away from my pain. In the nursery, rocking Dylan in the soft glow of his nightlight, I thought about the generations of hurt in his father's family, the abandoned wives, the left-behind children, the pattern repeating itself like some toxic inheritance. It stops with us, I whispered to my sleeping son. You're going to grow up seeing your mother build something meaningful from this mess. And maybe someday, you'll understand that the day your father left wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning of a better one. The next morning would bring more meetings, more decisions, more battles to fight. But that night, holding my son and feeling the first real stirrings of hope, I allowed myself to imagine a future where Brandon's betrayal was just one chapter in a much longer story of resilience and redemption. The email from Linda Harrison arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as I was finishing up a video call with my principal about extending my leave. My hands shook as I opened it. Dear Skylar, your message caught me completely off guard. In 30 years, you're the first person from Richard's new family to reach out. I spent hours trying to decide how to respond, but in the end, the answer was simple. Yes, I would very much like to talk. I'm actually planning to be in your area next month for a conference on domestic financial abuse. Perhaps we could meet? There's so much I wish someone had told me when I was in your position. With hope, Linda. I read the email 3 times, each time catching new details. A conference on financial abuse. Exactly what Brandon had done to me. It couldn't be a coincidence. I quickly checked the conference details she'd attached and felt my breath catch. The keynote speaker was listed as Linda Harrison, Ph.D., breaking the cycles of financial coercion in domestic partnerships. What do you think? I asked Dylan, who was contentedly playing with his activity mat beside my desk. He responded with a happy gurgle, reaching for the dangling toys above him. Yeah, I think so too. Before I could reply to Linda's email, my phone rang. It was Patricia. The judge granted our emergency petition, she said without preamble. Brandon's assets are frozen, and he's required to provide immediate temporary support. But Skylar, there's something else you need to know. I braced myself. In the past few weeks, I'd learned that good news often came packaged with complications. Jennifer walked into my office this morning, Patricia continued. Brandon's friend. She wants to talk to you. My stomach lurched. About what? She wouldn't tell me details, but she seemed agitated. Said it was important. I told her absolutely not without my presence, but I wanted to run it by you first. I looked at Dylan, thinking about patterns and cycles, about Linda turning her pain into purpose, about all the women who had sat in Patricia's blue-walled office, facing their own versions of betrayal. Set it up, I heard myself say, but not at your office, somewhere public. That's how I found myself 2 days later, sitting at an outdoor cafe with my lawyer beside me, and my son's stroller angled so I could see him while keeping an eye on the street. Jennifer arrived exactly on time, looking nothing like the polished junior partner I'd glimpsed at Brandon's office parties. Her designer suit was wrinkled, her makeup slightly smudged. She clutched her handbag like a shield as she approached our table. Thank you for meeting me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know you must hate me. I don't hate you, I replied, surprising myself by meaning it. I don't know you well enough to hate you. She flinched at that, then reached into her bag and pulled out a thumb drive. You need to see what's on this. Brandon, he's not who either of us thought he was. Patricia held up a hand. Before we go any further, I need to be clear. Anything said here could potentially be used in legal proceedings. Are you sure you want to continue? Jennifer nodded, tears forming in her eyes. 2 weeks ago, I found out I'm pregnant. When I told Brandon, he laughed. Said I was naive to think he'd leave his cushy setup for me. That once the divorce settlement was done, he'd be getting half of your assets plus alimony since you make more as a teacher than I do as a first-year partner. My head spun. But he makes 3 times what I do at the firm. On paper, Jennifer said bitterly. But for the past year, he's been having his real compensation funneled through a shell company. He's been building this plan for months, maybe longer. The thumb drive has everything. Emails, bank statements, conversations he didn't know I was recording after I got suspicious. Patricia was already pulling out her laptop. You understand this is effectively a confession to conspiracy to commit fraud? Jennifer straightened her shoulders. Yes, and I'll testify to all of it. I'm not letting him do to me what he did to Skylar, what his father did to Linda Harrison. I stared at her. You know about Linda? I found out last week. Did some digging after Brandon's reaction to my pregnancy. There's a pattern with the men in his family. They target women with careers, isolate them, drain them financially, then abandon them when they're most vulnerable. Richard did it to Linda. Brandon's uncle did it to his first wife in Florida. And Brandon was planning to do it to both of us. Dylan stirred in his stroller, and I automatically reached over to adjust his blanket. Jennifer watched the gesture with visible longing. I'm keeping my baby, she said suddenly. The firm has good maternal leave policies. Policies I helped write, ironically. I thought you should know everything. And maybe, she hesitated, glancing at Dylan, maybe our children shouldn't grow up thinking they don't have any siblings. The implications of her words hit me just as my phone buzzed with a new email notification. It was from Linda. Skylar. Something told me to look into Brandon's current situation more thoroughly. We need to talk sooner than next month. There's more to this story than you know, and I'm concerned that history might be repeating itself in ways we haven't yet uncovered. Can we video chat this evening? There are other women you need to meet. With growing concern, Linda. Looking up from my phone, I saw Jennifer watching me anxiously, Patricia reviewing the contents of the thumb drive with increasing alarm, and Dylan sleeping peacefully, unaware that his family story was growing more complex by the minute. Jennifer, I said carefully, what do you know about Brandon's uncle's first wife? Her answer would open up yet another layer of this unfolding mystery, one that would connect past and present in ways none of us could have anticipated. But sitting there in the sunshine, watching two very different women unite in their determination to break a cycle of abuse, I felt something unexpected. Not just anger or vindication, but a growing sense of purpose. This wasn't just about Brandon anymore. This was about something much bigger, a generational pattern that needed to be exposed and broken. And somehow, improbably, I found myself at the center of unraveling it all. The faces on my laptop screen looked like a gathering of sisters, though we shared no blood relation. Linda had organized the video call, and as each woman joined, I felt a growing sense of unreality. We were all connected by the same dark thread, the Harrison men and their calculated betrayals. "I'm Rachel," said a woman in her early 40s, her auburn hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. "Jack Harrison, Brandon's uncle, was my first husband. He left me in the delivery room in Miami General 12 years ago." "Catherine," added another, her British accent subtle but noticeable. "I was married to Peter Harrison, Richard's cousin, in London. Same story, different continent. Left me and our newborn daughter in 2019. Linda orchestrated the conversation with the skill of someone used to running support groups. "Skylar and Jennifer," she said, "you're not just the latest victims of this pattern. You might be our best chance at stopping it." Jennifer, joining from her apartment across town, pressed her hand to her still flat stomach. "Because we have proof of premeditation?" "Exactly," Linda nodded. "When Richard left me, when Jack left Rachel, when Peter left Catherine, they were careful. They covered their tracks, made it look like spontaneous decisions. But Brandon got sloppy," I finished, thinking of the thumb drive Jennifer had provided. "He left a paper trail." "More than that," Rachel interjected. "He kept records of conversations with the others. Emails, texts. He was learning from them, getting advice on how to set up the perfect exit." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All those business trips Brandon had taken to visit his mentors in the family, they hadn't been about career advancement. They had been strategy sessions for destroying lives. "There's something else you need to see," Catherine said, sharing her screen. A series of bank statements appeared, showing transfers between accounts with familiar names. They've been pooling their resources. It's not just individual acts of abandonment, it's a system. They support each other financially during divorces, share legal strategies, even invest together in properties used to hide assets. My mind raced back to the mortgage refinancing documents, the hidden accounts Kate had discovered. "The house," I said suddenly. "The loan Brandon took out. The money went to a company called Harrison Holdings LLC. Linda's expression sharpened. "That's their hub. They use it to shuffle money between family members, making it harder to trace during divorce proceedings. Richard's name is on the paperwork, but they're all involved." "But why?" Jennifer asked, the question we'd all been wondering. Why target professional women specifically? Why wait until pregnancy and childbirth? "Control," Linda replied simply. "They choose women with careers, with independence. The pregnancy is a vulnerability they exploit, a time when we're physically and emotionally dependent on our partners. They strike then because that's when it hurts most, when it leaves the deepest scars." "And the financial abuse?" I pressed, thinking of my drained accounts, my doubled mortgage. "It's about power," Rachel explained. "They don't just want to leave, they want to ensure we're too busy surviving to fight back, too broken to warn others." A cry from Dylan's nursery interrupted the discussion. As I got up to tend to him, I heard Catherine say, "They never count on us finding each other, though. That's their weakness." When I returned with Dylan, Linda was sharing details about the upcoming conference. "We've been gathering evidence for years, building a case about systematic financial abuse. But with what Jennifer and Skylar have uncovered, we can prove conspiracy," Patricia interjected, joining the call right on schedule. "The records Jennifer provided show clear communication between family members about these schemes. It's not just divorce fraud anymore. We're looking at organized financial crime." The implications slowly sank in. This wasn't just about my divorce from Brandon or Jennifer's pregnancy. This was about decades of calculated abuse, about generations of women and children whose lives had been deliberately derailed. I want to speak at the conference, I heard myself say. Not just about Brandon, but about all of it. About how they chose us because they thought we were perfect victims, successful enough to have resources worth stealing, independent enough to make isolation hurt more. Linda smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. But Skylar, you should know, going public means they'll fight back harder. The Harrison men don't like exposure. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. We need to talk. Things don't have to get ugly. Think about Dylan. Looking at the faces on my screen, Linda, who had built a movement from her pain, Rachel, who now ran a successful advocacy law firm, Catherine, who counseled women in financial crisis, Jennifer, protecting her unborn child by speaking out. I felt a surge of certainty. They've been counting on our shame, I said, holding Dylan closer, on our silence. But shame dies in the light, and I'm done being quiet. The meeting continued late into the evening, plans taking shape, strategies being formed. We were no longer isolated victims. We were a network, a force for change. And as I listened to these strong, resilient women share their stories and their wisdom, I realized something profound. Brandon hadn't just underestimated me when he walked out of that hospital room. He'd underestimated the power of women supporting women, of shared pain transformed into collective purpose. Later that night, after everyone had signed off and Dylan was sleeping peacefully, I opened my laptop and began to write. Not just my story, but our story. A testament to survival, to resilience, to the strength found in solidarity. The words flowed easily, powered by a new understanding. Sometimes the deepest wounds lead us to our greatest calling. Dear Brandon, I typed, I received your text about talking. You're right. Things don't have to get ugly. They just have to change. And change is coming, whether you and your family are ready for it or not. The conference center lobby buzzed with nervous energy. Linda stood at the podium doing her final microphone check, while I paced behind the stage curtain, clutching my note cards. Dylan was with Ellen, who had insisted on taking the day off work to help. In the front row, I could see Jennifer, now showing slightly at 4 months, sitting between Rachel and Catherine. 2 minutes, the event coordinator called out. My phone vibrated. A text from Barbara. Richard just found out about the conference. They're all in panic mode. Stay safe. I'm proud of you. I took a deep breath, remembering the hours of preparation, the late-night strategy sessions, the careful compilation of evidence. We weren't just telling our stories today. We were launching a formal campaign to expose decades of systematic abuse. Linda's voice filled the hall. Financial abuse doesn't always wear the face we expect. Sometimes it wears designer suits and carries briefcases. Sometimes it plans its attacks with spreadsheets and shell companies. Just then, my phone lit up with an incoming call from Brandon. I declined it, but another came immediately. This time from his father, Richard. As I blocked that number too, a movement at the back of the hall caught my eye. Through the curtain gap, I saw them. Brandon, Richard, and 2 other Harrison men, trying to slip in unnoticed. Patricia, positioned by the door, was already moving to intercept them. But they weren't heading for the stage. They were spreading out, taking seats in different sections of the audience. My stomach clenched as I realized their strategy. They were planning to disrupt the presentation from multiple points. And now, Linda was saying, I'd like to introduce someone who helped uncover the true scope of this issue. A woman who, like me 30 years ago, faced abandonment at her most vulnerable moment, but chose to fight back. Please welcome Skylar Harrison. The applause felt distant as I walked onto the stage. I could see Brandon's face in the crowd, that familiar smirk playing at his lips. He thought he knew what was coming, probably expected tears, accusations, a victim story that he could easily dismiss. Instead, I pulled up the first slide, a detailed financial chart. Financial abuse leaves a paper trail, I began, my voice steady. When I was in the hospital giving birth to my son, my husband abandoned us. But before he did, he spent 8 months systematically destroying our financial security. Today, I'm not here to tell you just my story. I'm here to show you exactly how he did it, and how his family has been doing the same thing to women for 3 generations. Brandon's smirk faltered. In the back, Richard stood up, probably planning to leave. But Rachel's voice rang out. "Going somewhere, Uncle Richard? Like you did at Miami General 12 years ago?" The room rippled with murmurs as our carefully orchestrated plan unfolded. With each new slide, another woman in the audience stood up, each connected to a Harrison man, each with documentation of their calculated abuse. "The pattern is always the same," I continued, clicking through the evidence. "They target professional women. They isolate us during pregnancy. They drain our resources through careful planning, and they count on our shame to keep us quiet." Brandon was on his feet now, moving toward the stage. But Jennifer stood up, her pregnancy visible in her fitted dress. And he froze. "This isn't just about divorce," I said, my voice growing stronger. "This is about organized financial crime. And thanks to detailed records kept by one of their own, we can prove it." The next slide showed emails between the Harrison men, discussing their tactics, sharing advice on how to maximize the damage they could do. Richard's face had gone pale. 2 other Harrison men were already hurrying toward the exits. "You can't do this," Brandon called out, his voice shaking with rage. "You're going to destroy our family." The words hung in the air for a moment before I responded. "No, Brandon. You did that yourself. We're just bringing it into the light." Linda stepped forward then, adding her voice to mine. 30 years ago, I thought I was alone. I thought my story was unique. Today, we're announcing the formation of the Financial Abuse Recovery Network. We'll provide legal support, financial counseling, and, most importantly, a community that understands. Because the greatest weapon against systematic abuse is women supporting women. As if on cue, Barbara walked into the hall. Richard's face contorted with shock as his wife of 30 years walked past him to join us on stage. "The cycle ends here," Barbara announced into the microphone. "I'm pledging my personal inheritance to fund this network. No more women will face this battle alone." The rest of the presentation passed in a blur of solidarity and strength. When it was over, when the Harrison men had slunk away and the reporters had finished their questions, I found myself in a quiet corner with Jennifer. "I was so scared," she admitted, resting her hand on her bump. "But watching you up there, we're going to be okay," I told her, meaning it for the first time. "Our children are going to grow up knowing a different kind of strength." That evening, as Ellen helped me put Dylan to bed, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of a young man who looked startlingly like Brandon, with a simple message. "I'm Daniel. Linda told me what you all did today. Thank you for helping make sure no more Harrison men grow up thinking this is okay." I looked at my sleeping son, thinking about cycles broken and new beginnings. The road ahead would still be challenging. The Harrison men wouldn't go down without a fight. But as I read through the hundreds of messages flooding in from women who'd seen our presentation, who recognized their own stories in ours, I knew we'd chosen the right path. The shame that had once felt like a prison now felt like fuel for change. And somewhere in Seattle, in Miami, in London, and right here in my own city, women were drawing strength from the knowledge that they weren't alone. We had turned our pain into power, our isolation into community, our endings into beginnings. A month after the conference, I sat in my newly reorganized home office, surrounded by sticky notes and laptop screens. Dylan played contentedly in his pack-and-play beside me while I juggled video calls between time zones. Rachel in Miami, Catherine in London, Linda in Seattle. The Financial Abuse Recovery Network was taking shape faster than any of us had anticipated. "Another 20 women have come forward," Rachel reported, shuffling through her papers. "Not all Harrison-related, but the pattern is the same. Professional women, pregnancy, calculated financial abuse. We're going to need more counselors," Catherine added. "The waiting list for financial recovery coaching is growing daily." A notification popped up on my second screen. An email from Brandon's lawyer. The subject line read, "Settlement offer." I ignored it for now, focusing instead on the community we were building. "Skylar?" Linda's voice brought me back to the conversation. "Have you thought more about the education program?" I nodded, pulling up the proposal I'd been working on. After the conference, I'd realized that my background in education could serve a greater purpose. I've outlined a curriculum for financial literacy workshops, not just basic budgeting, but how to recognize red flags, protect assets, maintain financial independence within relationships. Perfect timing, Rachel chimed in. The grant committee meets next week, with Barbara's seed funding and the corporate sponsorships coming in. A knock at my front door interrupted us. Through the security camera feed, I saw Jennifer, one hand supporting her growing belly. Sorry, I told the group. Need to take a quick break. Jennifer had been staying with her sister since the conference, after Brandon's increasingly erratic behavior had made her feel unsafe at her apartment. She looked tired but determined as I let her in. They offered a settlement, she said without preamble, holding up her phone. Both of us. Same day. Typical Harrison coordination. I gestured to my office. I got the same email. Haven't opened it yet. Want to look together? As we sat down at my desk, I couldn't help but marvel at how life had changed. 6 months ago, I would have seen Jennifer as the other woman, the enemy. Now she was one of my strongest allies in this fight. The settlement offers were predictably manipulative, generous on the surface, but with carefully worded clauses requiring our silence about the Harrison family's practices. In exchange for signing non-disclosure agreements, they would provide comfortable financial support for our children. They're scared, Jennifer observed, rubbing her belly absently. The conference exposure is affecting their businesses. Richard's firm lost 3 major clients last week. Good, I said, thinking of all the women who had reached out after the conference, sharing similar stories of calculated betrayal. Let them feel a fraction of what we felt. My phone buzzed. A text from Barbara. They're getting desperate. Richard just tried to access my trust fund. Stay alert. Jennifer read the message over my shoulder and sighed. Sometimes I forget she's going through this too. 30 years of marriage. And she chose to stand with us, I finished. Barbara's courage in publicly opposing her husband had given our cause credibility we couldn't have achieved otherwise. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity. I had a call with my principal about developing a financial literacy program for high school seniors, drawing from my own experience to help young people recognize warning signs. Then a meeting with Patricia about expanding her practice to handle more cases like ours. Finally, a counseling session where I shared my story with a group of women just starting their recovery journeys. As evening settled in, Ellen came over with dinner. She'd been doing this regularly since the conference, understanding that my days were now filled with building something bigger than myself. "You've got that look?" she observed as we sat in my kitchen, watching Dylan and her daughter play together on the floor. "What look?" "The one that says you're planning something new." I smiled, thinking about the draft sitting in my documents folder. An outline for a book, not just about the Harrison family's abuse, but about the larger issue of financial coercion in relationships, about how economic abuse often hides behind respectability and success. "I've been thinking," I said slowly, "about what Linda said about turning pain into purpose. When Brandon walked into that hospital room and said he wouldn't take responsibility for his son, he thought he was ending my story. But really, he was just giving you a better one to tell," Ellen finished. Later that night, after Dylan was asleep, I opened my laptop and began to write. This is not a story about victimhood. This is a story about women who refused to be silenced, who turned their individual tragedies into collective triumph. When my husband abandoned me and our newborn son, he thought he was following a family tradition of destroying women. Instead, he accidentally helped create a sisterhood of survivors. My phone lit up with a message from Daniel, Brandon's half-brother. "Mom showed me your proposal for teaching financial literacy in schools. I'm a teacher too. Maybe we could collaborate." Another text followed quickly. "I've spent my life trying not to be like my father and brother. I want to be part of making things better." Looking at his message, I thought about Dylan sleeping upstairs, about Jennifer's unborn child, about the next generation we were all working to protect. The Harrison men had spent decades perfecting the art of abandonment, but in doing so, they'd inadvertently created something powerful, a community of women determined to break the cycle. As I typed my response to Daniel, I felt the familiar surge of purpose that had replaced my old feelings of shame and fear. We were writing a new story now, one where betrayal led to brotherhood, where endings sparked beginnings, where women lifted each other up instead of being torn down. And somewhere in the city, Brandon and his family were realizing that their greatest mistake hadn't been leaving us. It had been underestimating what we could become once we found each other. 1 year to the day after Brandon walked into that hospital room, I stood in a different hospital corridor, holding Dylan while Jennifer breathed through her contractions. Her sister Emma held her hand on one side, while I supported her from the other. Outside the window, dawn was breaking over the city skyline. "I can't believe he's actually missing this too," Jennifer said between breaths, a mix of sadness and anger in her voice. "Even after everything." "Hey," I said firmly, adjusting Dylan on my hip. "Look at all the people who are here. Look at who's not missing it." She managed a smile, looking around the room. Barbara sat in the corner, knitting what looked like a baby blanket. Linda had flown in from Seattle the moment Jennifer's contractions started. Rachel and Catherine were on their way from the airport. We'd created our own kind of family, stronger than blood ties or marriage certificates. "Another one coming," the nurse warned, and Jennifer gripped my hand harder. Hours later, as Jennifer cradled her newborn daughter, surrounded by women who understood exactly what this moment meant, I thought about how different this scene was from my own delivery. Where there had been abandonment, there was now support. Where there had been isolation, there was community. "I want to name her Hope," Jennifer announced softly. "Because that's what all of you gave me when I thought I had none left." Barbara wiped away tears, putting the finishing touches on the blanket. "It's perfect." My phone buzzed, a message from Daniel with a photo of the morning's paper. The headline read, "Harrison Financial Group under federal investigation for systematic fraud." Below it was a smaller headline, "Financial Abuse Recovery Network celebrates first year, helps over 500 women." "Should we tell her?" Linda asked quietly, seeing the news over my shoulder. I shook my head. "Let her have this moment. The rest can wait." The investigation had been building for months, fueled by the evidence we'd gathered and the testimony of dozens of women who'd come forward after the conference. Brandon and his family were finally facing consequences, not just socially, but legally. But that wasn't the victory that mattered most. The real triumph was in moments like this, Jennifer welcoming her daughter surrounded by love instead of betrayal. It was in the weekly support groups where women shared their stories and found their voices. It was in the high school classes where I now taught young people about financial independence and healthy relationships. Dylan squirmed in my arms, reaching for hope. At 18 months old, he was already walking, already forming words, already showing me every day that Brandon's absence had made room for something better in our lives. "Want to meet your sister?" I asked him softly, lowering him carefully beside Jennifer's bed. We'd decided months ago that our children would grow up as siblings, regardless of what Brandon had chosen. "You know," Barbara said, watching them, "Richard called again yesterday. Wanted to know if I'd consider reconciliation." "And?" Linda asked, though we all knew the answer. Barbara straightened her shoulders. "I told him I'd found a better version of family." Later that evening, after Jennifer and Hope were resting and the others had gone to their hotels, I sat in the hospital garden with Dylan asleep in his stroller. My laptop was open to the final chapter of my book, now nearly complete. The cursor blinked at the end of the last paragraph. "They say the moment that breaks you can also be the moment that makes you." When my husband walked away from us in this same hospital a year ago, he thought he was following a family tradition of destroying women. Instead, he inadvertently helped create a movement of women rebuilding themselves and each other. Today, I watched another woman face the same abandonment with an army of support behind her. I held her hand as she brought new life into the world, surrounded by the kind of love that doesn't walk away when things get difficult. And I realized that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose, the ones forged in shared pain and collective healing. My son will grow up knowing a different kind of strength. He'll see it in his mother, who turned betrayal into purpose. He'll see it in his Aunt Jennifer, who chose hope over bitterness. He'll see it in all the women who refused to let someone else's cowardice define their story. The Harrison men spent generations perfecting the art of abandonment, but in doing so, they taught us the power of staying strong, staying together, staying true to ourselves. And in the end, that's the legacy that will endure. A soft breeze rustled the garden flowers as I saved the document. My phone showed messages from the network. More women reaching out, more stories emerging, more lives beginning to heal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. The work of breaking cycles and building bridges was never really finished. But sitting there in the growing dusk, watching my son sleep peacefully, I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that had led me to purpose. Gratitude for the women who had become my sisters in survival. Gratitude even, in a strange way, for Brandon, who had tried to break me but instead had set me free. Dylan stirred, reaching out in his sleep. I took his tiny hand in mine, marveling at how far we'd come from that first terrible morning of abandonment. "Sweet dreams, my love," I whispered. "Tomorrow's another day to make something beautiful from what tried to break us." And in the quiet of that hospital garden, surrounded by the echoes of endings and beginnings, I finally understood. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not what we receive from others, but what we learn to give ourselves. The power to rise, to rebuild, to create light from darkness that had been within me all along. Brandon hadn't destroyed my life that day in the hospital room. He had accidentally helped me find my way to a better one.